Hi class, Dr. Madron here. I want to spend a little bit of time discussing the sociological imagination, hoping to provide some clarity to a very important foundational concept to sociology, but one that can be a little bit difficult to understand if you're reading it directly from C. Wright Mills, who coined the term sociological imagination. Um, so, um, when if you're reading C. Wright Mills, and you haven't spent a lot of time in the sociology world, it could be difficult to really assess and understand where he's going with all this. So if I'm to take it and really kind of put it in a way that hopefully makes more sense to you, the sociological imagination is allowing us to remove our biases as individuals and to attempt to look at things at a societal level. So it's understanding the context of a individual situation, but at the societal level. And so Mills believed that it was critical to see the vivid awareness of the relationship between experience and the wider society. So again, we're trying to again understand the context of a situation, but what's going on at the societal level that might be causing this? And I know that still may sound a little bit unclear, um, but let me try to now explain and expand on this through example. So, if we are to look at obesity, and I would tend to say let's look at childhood obesity, and I like to use this example when talking to students because oftentimes when we talk about children, we are not necessarily, we're thinking of children as dependent on others, whether it is their parents, whether it is their teachers or their school, whether it's an aunt or uncle, whether it's someone at church, whether it's a daycare, right? You get the idea. We're tending to not put a whole lot of blame on the person, which is really what the sociological imagination is asking us not to do, and that's how we remove our bias. And so, um, let me also point out that from a sociological perspective, especially if we are a professional sociologist and we're doing academic research or we're doing research for policymakers, um, looking at an individual and saying they are individually responsible, that does really nothing to um, it does nothing to prevent the next person from being a part of the problem. So if we say this person made bad choices and that's why they're obese, um, it doesn't really help us uh, from preventing the next person from becoming obese. What do we say? Oh, you make better choices when eating. Instead, we would say, well, what's going on at the societal level? So are there patterns that we see? Okay. And so when we think about childhood obesity, I'll give you just a few seconds to think on your own. And I'll also point out that um, let's try, for the sake of this, let's try to avoid medical conditions that are uncontrollable to a child. So a child may be born with a medical condition that has led them to be obese. Um, that would be something that would be studied in the medical community. It would only leak over into the sociological world if we started to see an increase in this medical condition over time that might lead us to question, are there environmental um, influences, let's say during a pregnancy? So is mom doing something that could lead to this medical condition, right? But if we're just talking about a something that is really uncontrollable medical condition, we would want the medical community to be focusing on that research. Sociological research is going to look at what's going on in society, right? And so we might look at what's going on presently. And then we also, to better understand it, might look at the history that led to where we are today. And so, again, let me give you a few seconds to think. What are some societal influences that might have led to an increase in childhood obesity? Which, to give you an example, um, we saw it in 1978, 5% of children were obese. In 2016, that rate was 18.5%. Okay, so we have seen an increase. So when you think about childhood obesity, what are things that are coming to mind that you think led to this pattern, this increase that's impacting millions of children? I'll give you a few seconds. So I suspect some of you have thought to yourselves some things like, oh, they're playing more games, like they're sedentary, they're playing more video games. Okay, you might be right. Some of you might have said, well, they're eating more junk food. That's true too. The junk food's different today. We're consuming a lot more high fructose corn syrup. Now, high fructose corn syrup is linked to obesity, and it's in a lot of things, right? Some of you might have said, don't exercise enough. And you might have thought, well, that could be related to the video games, or you could have thought it might not be as common to exercise in school like it used to be. Some of you might have said, man, if you're eating those school lunches, school breakfast, man, they're terribly unhealthy, right? I mean, my child, for example, um, my wife's a school teacher, and my son occasionally, we try not to because we know um, how bad those products are that they feed to that they put in our schools. Um, so we try to limit that. But one thing, for example, that my wife was telling me they were giving out was this big old muffin, and she said it had over 30 grams of sugar in it. Oh my goodness, right? So some of you might have remembered that from when you were in school, that how things are changing. Um, Perhaps the marketing of these products, these sodas and chips and things like that. Perhaps um, perhaps some of you have said that the work has become so demanding for parents or for you maybe that you're dependent on things like fast food, and fast food is predominantly unhealthy food, high in calorie, high in fat, high in sugar stuff. Um, so all these things that you have mentioned are outside of the control of the child, and some of these actually may be dependent on a family's income to purchase healthy food items, to have time to cook those healthy food items. Now, if we want to look at the history, so what has, and we could look at the history at a lot of things, but since we talked about high fructose corn syrup, well, what has changed there? And it's like, my goodness, we've seen such, and a lot of folks point to this 1,000% increase because that was like, whoa, that was like the thing that researchers really like to point at as like a monumental number. And so from 1970 to 1990, there was 1,000% increase in high fructose corn syrup consumption. And so then you say, well, what happened, right? What led to that? And you go back and you look at the farm subsidies specifically targeted at corn production from the New Deal, and how that has continued on, and how corn tends to continues to be subsidized in our country. Subsidized meaning that the government is helping to fund for the production, even if it were to be at a loss. So it offsets any potential lost costs. Um, Whereas we don't really see any of those subsidies for things like broccoli and romaine lettuce, grapes and apples and things like that. Um, so let me just kind of conclude and bring this all hopefully to a better understanding by example. The sociological imagination is allowing us to instead look at the individual, instead of blaming this individual for individual choice, to say, wow, um, since children are dependent on schools to provide, uh, many children are, especially low income children, but not just low income children. Middle income children as well can be dependent on these breakfasts and lunches in the schools, and they can be terribly unhealthy. Um, Another is, okay, well, parents may be, uh, a lot busier, spending a lot more time working, maybe working multiple jobs, and that may lead them, therefore, to choose fast food or items that are quickly, you think about those processed food items like a hamburger helper or something like that. Um, may may lead parents to make decisions like that. And that's the other thing is one time, a singular event doesn't lead us to obesity. It's doing this over and over and over and over and over again. Um, the change in exercise and how technology has changed. Um, technology has made technology has made uh, games more interesting. It has, we have everyone has a device now. A lot of kids are able to grab an iPad or something like that, and leads them less time to be outside running around. So a lot of these things that we're saying um, have changed from, let's say, the 1970s or the 1980s. And so these societal impacts, these societal trends have changed our culture, which has led us into having high rates of childhood obesity. So I hope that um, helps to allow you to better understand the sociological imagination, looking beyond an individual, understanding why it exists, but looking beyond an individual's experience and looking at the patterns, looking at, well, um, you know, this is happening across the board here, and so that's why we're seeing these impacts. It's because it's becoming more widespread.